Welcome to Changemakers, a podcast from APH. We're talking to people from around the world who are creating positive change in the lives of people who are blind or have low vision. Here's your host.
Hello and welcome to Changemakers. I'm APH's Public Relations Manager, Sarah Brown, and we're still celebrating Braille Literacy Month on this podcast, and we're going to take a look back at how Braille came to be. We'll also hear more from our interview with Ann Durham and Greg Stilson about the Monarch, and we'll even hear from an individual who has tested it. Up first, we have APH Museum Director Michael Hudson here to talk about the origin of Braille. Hello, Michael, and welcome to Changemakers.
Thank you, Sarah. Happy Braille Literacy Awareness Month.
Yes, it sure is. And let's talk about the history of Braille. Can you talk about its beginnings, the middle, and pretty much where we are today?
Sure. Of course, that's a pretty big softball question there, right? So we call it Braille because it was invented by a kid named Louis Braille, who was born in 1809 in Paris, France, lost his vision in an accident in his father's workshop. And at the time, France had the only school for kids that were blind or low vision, and Louis got to go there. And when he was 12 years old, he was exposed to a dot code that had been invented by a guy named Charles Barbier. And Barbier is this fascinating character who had to flee France during the French Revolution and was an inventor, and he just was interested in codes and communication. And he'd come up with this dot code, right? It used 12 dots, 6 dots high, 2 dots wide. And it wasn't based on the alphabet. It was based on phonics, the way we pronounce words. But Louis and his buddies at the School for the Blind loved the the Barbier code, because for the first time, they could take notes in class. They could send messages to each other that no one else in the school could read. They loved it. But Louis quickly realizes that the Barbier code is too clunky. It's got too many dots. So he simplifies it down to just the 6 dots we use today. He based it on the alphabet so you could learn how to spell and punctuate and capitalize on all the things that we do when we write and print. And then he publishes his book for the first time in 1829. But the system is not immediately adopted anywhere, even in France. And it kicked off this whole period that we call the War of the Dots, where different competing systems were kicking around, and there were raised letter systems, which were just embossed, letters. And so it would not, in the United States, it took until 1932, actually, long after Louis had died, before we adopted the standard Braille code that we've used for so long. And of course, Braille, the code, is alive, Sarah. That's the cool thing about it. We're constantly, tweaking it and adapting it so that it reflects the way that everybody uses print. Right. And so we're constantly, 20 years ago, no one used the hashtag. Right. And 40 years ago, nobody used the little @ symbol to go, at aph.org. Right. So we changed the way we use the language. So the Braille code has had to, constantly be edited and added to. And that's why the code that we use right now is called UEB, right? Unified English Braille. And then there's all the technology that surrounds it. Right. For decades, if you wanted to write Braille, you did it with a little hand tool called a slate and stylus that had little windows, and you would use your stylus to poke the dots in. And then in 1890, a guy named Frank Hall at the Illinois School for the Blind invents the first successful mechanical Braille writer. And then we call it the Hall Braille writer. And, every Braille writer that's still around is based on Hall's original machine. And then in the 1970s, this French guy named Oleg Tretyakov came up with this thing called the refreshable Braille display. And so when you look at modern devices like what we sell in our catalog, like the Chameleon and the Mantis, they use these refreshable Braille displays that connect to your phone or to your computer, or even as independent note takers, and they raise the pens into the patterns of the Braille. So you can download anything you want off the internet if it's in print, and then you can read it yourself in Braille. You can send people messages in Braille, but it arrives on their computer in print. So Braille has just proven to be this just amazing, flexible, elegant little code that has made it possible for now over 200 years of Braille literacy for people that are blind or low vision.
Now, I know there's been some instances in the past where APH has partnered with other businesses and organizations to help advance Braille. Talk about that.
We've been responsible for some of the big advances in Braille. Like, we worked with IBM in the 1950s to figure out how to computerize the translation of print to Braille, and that sped everything up. And that's at the heart of all these machines that we use. But at the same time, we had this thing called, and the Braille users out there will remember the old lavender Braille writer, which was an attempt to substitute a lot of plastic parts so that the Braille writer would be lightweight, right? But it turns out that the plastic wasn't very durable, and so the machine broke all the time, right? And so in the end, it is usually the marketplace that determines, what is the right product at the right time.
So true, so true. And timing is a big deal too, timing.
But, sometimes things come along too early, right? They're ahead of their time, and the people are just not ready for them.
So true, so true. Now, you talked about how Braille has changed, or just it's a living thing, for, like you said, back in years ago, they wouldn't have known what the hashtag was, or
right.
How it's evolved. Can you talk about what Braille shortcomings, any additional shortcomings that there are with Braille?
Well, I don't think I know of any shortcomings in Braille today, but the big problem historically has always been bulk, right? So in the 1959, 1960, APH undertook the largest Braille project ever attempted. It was a translation of the World Book Encyclopedia. And so there are great pictures of staff in the front yard at APH with the print version of the encyclopedia, and behind it were stacked the 5 or 6 volumes of Braille that were necessary to make the print. So it's like if the thing fell on you, it would have crushed you, right? It was that bulky. And that was from the beginning. It was always a complaint that people had, that because the character needs to be big enough to fit right underneath your fingertip, it meant that the overall book was a lot bigger. And that's still true today of our paper books. When you might get a high school physics or a chemistry book that might come in 30 or 40 volumes. And so that's where the refreshable Braille display, or even, the new the Monarch, the dynamic tactile display that APH has been working on, the Holy Braille, right? The Holy Braille of Braille is this refreshable Braille, full page refreshable Braille display that also includes graphics. Well, that's very exciting that we're on the cusp, potentially, bearing in mind, the caveat we mentioned about picking winners, technological winners. We might be on the cusp of a time when a kid might be able to carry all their books around on one convenient tablet that fits right into their backpack. And isn't that exciting? And it still uses the same A and the same M and the same Z that Louis invented as a 12-year-old boy back in the early 1800s. I think that's cool.
And I think you just answered my next question, which is the future of Braille is currently in the works. As a museum director of APH Museum, how does that feel, knowing something's in the pipeline that will truly change the way Braille is received? Because it will.
Yeah, I'm very excited about it, because it basically brings to the Braille community the same benefits that people who use a Kindle or any of these e-readers have. It's really an awesome idea to imagine that you would take the single most big objection to Braille, which is its bulk, and wipe it away. But I actually think one of the biggest challenges, Sarah, is not technological. It's educational and systemic, and that is that we need to encourage Braille literacy for those people in the community for whom Braille is the best reading medium, right? So whether it's Braille or large print or audio, whatever the best medium is for you based on your abilities, we need to not let Braille get swept under the carpet, and we need to focus on Braille literacy here in the United States for our kids.
Well, so true, so true. Now, is there anything else you want to say about Braille, whether it's the past, the present, or its future?
Braille is literacy, Sarah. Braille is literacy, and so it's a tool that a really simple, little elegant tool invented a long time ago, but it's still very, very relevant.
Well, they say the classics never die, and this is a prime example. And if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
And it's still in use, so that's true. Now, we've got some exciting stuff going on at the APH Museum. Can you let our listeners know what's going on?
Sure. Oh, gosh. Wow. Back in 2020, we became a partner with the American Foundation for the Blind to bring the Helen Keller Archive, AFB Helen Keller Archive, to Louisville. And as a part of that partnership, we are going to be closing our museum this summer. And, Helen and Annie Sullivan gave all of their collections to AFB with the dream that one day they might be put together into a museum exhibit. And so we are going to we're collaborating with AFB to make that dream come true. And we are going to reimagine the way that museums work for people with disabilities. We're going to be telling all kinds of great stories. We're going to be demystifying blindness. We're going to be, introducing Helen Keller as one of the greatest women of the 19th and 20th centuries. We're going to be talking about APH and innovation, and we're going to do it all in a brand new facility that is going to defy a lot of expectations for how you tell stories both to and about people with disabilities. It's going to be the most accessible museum in the world.
Yeah, it's some exciting things. And when can a person see the museum now before it closes?
Right. So we're open 8:30 to 4:30 Monday through Friday, and 10 to 3 on Saturdays, and we're going to be open through June 3rd. And then we will close for about 2 years and open sometime in 2025.
Awesome.
So if you want to come see us, you need to come see us before June 3rd of this summer. And then when we reopen, obviously, there'll be lots of opportunities to see the new installation.
Absolutely. All right, Michael, thank you so much for joining me today on Changemakers.
Thank you, Sarah.
Now let's take a look at the future product that's going to make changes in the way we access Braille and tactile graphics. The Monarch, a multi-line device that displays both Braille and tactile graphics, will transform the way teachers and students engage with materials in the classroom. Let's hear from APH's Vice President and Chief Officer, Innovation and Strategy, Ann Durham, and Head of Global Innovation, Greg Stilson, on the feedback received during the Monarch's prototype testing and what's next for 2023. Now, talk about the reception or the feedback you've all received from we can call it the Monarch now. So talk about the reactions to the prototypes and I guess in the